when a loyal K-9 uncovered a secret that could topple an entire police department. No one expected the price would be his life. Framed for a crime he didn't commit, Officer Ryan Blake had lost everything: his badge, his freedom, and even his faith in justice. But with Keanu Reeves as his only ally and shadow, his courageous German shepherd, leading the way, they uncovered a conspiracy so dangerous it would demand the ultimate sacrifice. What began as a fight for innocence would end in a moment of heart-wrenching loyalty that no one could forget. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Every seat was filled, every breath held, as the gavel slammed against the judge's desk. Guilty. The word echoed like a death knell in Ryan Blake's ears, a decorated officer with 15 years of service. Ryan sat handcuffed at the defendant's table, his shoulders heavy with disbelief. His spotless record meant nothing now. Framed for stealing evidence, betrayed by the very department he had dedicated his life to, and condemned by the testimony of his once mentor, Captain Marcus Hale. The weight of the sentence wasn't what broke him most. It was the fact that this trial had ripped away everything he valued: his badge, his freedom, and Shadow. Near the back of the room, Shadow, a sleek German shepherd with sharp, amber eyes, sat silently, his gaze fixed on Ryan, loyal to the end. Shadow had been more than a K-9 partner. He was family, a friend who had stood by Ryan through life-threatening chases and quiet nights of companionship. Keanu Reeves sat just a few rows behind Shadow, his signature black hair framing an expression of cold fury. He leaned forward, his piercing eyes watching every move in the courtroom. Keanu wasn't just an actor or a celebrity here. He was Ryan's closest friend, a retired detective who had long since stepped away from the chaos of law enforcement. But today, he was here for Ryan and for Shadow. As the bailiffs moved to escort Ryan out of the room, his voice cracked through the stifling silence. "Your Honor," he said, his words heavy with emotion. "Before I'm taken away, please, let me say goodbye to my partner." The judge paused, frowning as murmurs rippled through the courtroom. His gavel struck again. 2 minutes, he said gruffly. The moment the bailiff unclipped Shadow's leash, the dog bolted toward Ryan. His claws clattered against the floor, echoing through the chamber like a rallying cry. Ryan dropped to his knees, gripping Shadow tightly as the dog pushed his face into Ryan's chest. "I'm sorry, boy," Ryan whispered, his voice breaking. "I let you down. I won't be there to protect you anymore." Shadow whimpered softly, as if understanding the depth of his partner's anguish. But then, something changed. Shadow tensed in Ryan's arms, his ears perking up. His nose twitched as he began to sniff Ryan's jacket urgently, pawing at the fabric. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. "What's the dog doing?" the judge asked, leaning forward with a frown. Shadow barked sharply, his eyes locked on Ryan's chest. The German shepherd pulled at the jacket, his barks growing more insistent. An officer approached cautiously, and with a swift tug, Shadow tore the fabric enough to reveal something metallic hidden inside. A small recording device fell to the ground with a clink. The room went deathly silent. Keanu's eyes narrowed. He rose to his feet, his voice cutting through the tension. "Play it," he said, his tone commanding. The officer hesitated, glancing at the judge, who gave a curt nod. The officer picked up the device, fumbling with the buttons before pressing play. A crackle of static filled the room, followed by a voice. "Just plant the evidence. Blake's clean record makes him the perfect scapegoat. No one's going to question it." Ryan's heart stopped. He knew that voice. Captain Marcus Hale. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The prosecutor went pale, stammering something about the device being inadmissible. But the judge slammed his gavel down, his expression dark. "That's enough." He leaned forward, his voice heavy with authority. "This trial is not over. Officers, secure that device as evidence and escort the defendant back to holding. I want this case reopened immediately." For the first time in weeks, Ryan felt a flicker of hope. He glanced down at Shadow, who stood proudly by his side, tail wagging slightly. "Good boy," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Keanu stepped forward, his hand resting briefly on Ryan's shoulder. "We're going to fix this," he said, his voice low and steady. But as the courtroom began to clear, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Hale had set him up. But how deep did this conspiracy go? And how far were they willing to go to protect their secrets? The courtroom was still buzzing with murmurs when the judge's gavel slammed down one final time. His voice echoed across the room. "Given the emergence of new evidence, this case will be reopened for further investigation. Defendant Ryan Blake will be released on temporary supervision, under strict conditions. Mr. Reeves, you've vouched for him. He's your responsibility now." Ryan's eyes widened. Freedom, even temporary, was the last thing he had expected. He looked over at Keanu, who nodded firmly at the judge. "You won't regret it," Keanu said, his voice steady. Shadow wagged his tail slightly, as if sensing that this was a small victory, though the battle was far from over. As Ryan stepped outside the courthouse for the first time in weeks, the cool air hit him like a jolt of reality. He crouched down, running his hands through Shadow's thick fur. "You've always had my back, haven't you?" he whispered. Shadow let out a soft bark, nudging Ryan's shoulder. Keanu placed a hand on Ryan's arm. "Don't get too comfortable. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. They'll be watching us. And you're still technically in their custody. But," he paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, "we're going to make our move before they can make theirs." Ryan nodded, his jaw tightening. "Where do we start?" Keanu smiled faintly. With the one thing they didn't count on: Shadow. The reunion was short-lived as Keanu quickly led Ryan and Shadow to a nondescript black SUV parked in an alleyway. "We're heading to a storage facility Hale's men have been using. I've been watching them for weeks," Keanu explained, his hands steady on the wheel. "If there's anything else tying Hale to this conspiracy, it's going to be there." Shadow sat alert in the back seat, his sharp eyes scanning the passing streets as if he understood every word. Ryan leaned back, his fists clenched. "Hale betrayed me. He betrayed the badge, the department, everything we stand for. He's not getting away with this." Keanu glanced at him, his voice calm but firm. "He won't. But we've got to be smart about this. They've already proven they'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets. Don't let your anger make you careless." When they arrived at the storage facility, the air was thick with tension. The building was old and decrepit, its rusted walls echoing the weight of the secrets it held. Shadow sniffed the ground intently, his tail rigid as he led them toward a series of lockers near the back. Suddenly, Shadow stopped, his nose pressed against a specific locker. He barked sharply, pawing at the ground. Keanu crouched beside him, studying the locker closely. "Good boy," he muttered. Ryan stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly as he forced the rusty door open. Inside, there was a stack of documents and a laptop, both hastily hidden beneath a pile of dusty blankets. Ryan's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. This is it. Bribes, transactions, names, everything they've been covering up. Keanu scanned the papers quickly, his jaw tightening. "This ties Hale to RK. It's worse than I thought. This isn't just about framing you. This is an entire network of corruption." Shadow barked again, his body tense as if sensing danger. Keanu immediately straightened, his hand moving to the firearm at his waist. "We've been made," he said quietly. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the storage facility. Ryan's heart pounded as he grabbed the evidence. "What do we do?" Keanu smirked faintly. "We fight." Shadow growled low in his throat, standing protectively in front of Ryan as Keanu drew his weapon. The door to the facility burst open, and masked men stormed in, their guns trained on the trio. "Get down," Keanu barked, shoving Ryan behind a metal crate. Gunfire erupted, the sharp cracks echoing off the walls. Shadow moved like a shadow himself, weaving through the chaos, his sharp instincts guiding him. But as one of the men raised his weapon, aiming for Ryan, Shadow lunged forward. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Ryan's scream cut through the chaos as Shadow collapsed to the ground. The night air was heavy as Ryan and Keanu emerged from the compound. Their steps weighed down by the haunting emptiness Shadow's absence left behind. The evidence was secured in a weathered black duffel bag slung over Keanu's shoulder. But the victory felt hollow. Ryan's face was pale, his eyes distant, replaying Shadow's final moments over and over. Keanu broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "We can grieve later. Right now, we need to move. Hale's men won't stop just because we've got the files." Ryan nodded, though the fire in his eyes flickered dimly. He glanced back at the compound one last time, imagining Shadow's silhouette standing proudly in the doorway, as if guarding their escape. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. "Let's finish this." The drive back to the safe house was silent. Ryan stared out the window, the passing city lights blurring together. Keanu glanced at him occasionally but said nothing, understanding that grief like this couldn't be soothed with words. When they reached the abandoned mechanic's shop, Ryan stepped out first, his movements mechanical as he grabbed the bag of evidence. He paused outside the door, taking a deep breath before stepping into the space that now felt unbearably empty. Shadow's blanket was still there, rumpled and stained, a painful reminder of the dog's unwavering loyalty. Ryan knelt beside it, his hand brushing over the fabric as memories flooded in. The times Shadow had stood between him and danger, the countless nights they had spent together. Shadow's head resting on his lap, the world's chaos fading away in the quiet moments they shared. His chest tightened as he whispered, "I'm sorry, boy. I wasn't fast enough." Keanu's voice came from behind him, gentle but firm. "Shadow wouldn't want you to blame yourself. He'd want you to see this through." Ryan didn't look up, but he nodded. "Then we'll make it count." The next few hours were a blur of activity. The files were spread out across the workbench, the laptop humming softly as Keanu decrypted the hard drive. Ryan worked alongside him, cataloging every piece of evidence: bank transactions, emails, photos. The scale of the corruption was staggering, implicating not just Hale and RK but dozens of high-ranking officials, business leaders, and law enforcement officers. This wasn't just a conspiracy, it was an empire. Keanu leaned back, his eyes scanning the list of names on the screen. "This is enough to take down Hale and RK, but it's also enough to make us targets. We need to release this strategically. If it goes public too soon, they'll bury it before it gains traction." Ryan stared at the photos of shadowy meetings and stacks of cash, his jaw tightening. "We've got to make sure this sticks. Shadow gave his life for this. I won't let it get swept under the rug." Keanu nodded, his respect for Ryan deepening. "There's one more step we need to take. Hale's still out there, and as long as he's free, he's a threat. If we're going to end this, we need to bring him in ourselves." The plan was dangerous, but they had no other choice. Using a burner phone, Keanu sent a cryptic message to Hale, posing as one of his men and luring him to an abandoned warehouse under the guise of a private meeting. Hale, desperate to regroup after the night's losses, took the bait. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Ryan and Keanu prepared for the confrontation. They armed themselves carefully, their expressions grim but resolute. For Ryan, this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about honoring Shadow's sacrifice, ensuring that his partner's final act of bravery wasn't in vain. The warehouse was cavernous and silent, its rusted beams creaking faintly in the breeze. Ryan and Keanu took their positions, concealed in the shadows as they waited. When Hale arrived, flanked by 2 armed guards, Ryan felt a surge of anger course through him. This was the man who had destroyed his life, betrayed the badge, and orchestrated the events that led to Shadow's death. Keanu placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, grounding him. "Stay focused. We need him alive." Ryan nodded tightly, his grip firm on his weapon. They waited until Hale and his men were deep inside the building before making their move. Keanu stepped out first, his voice calm but commanding. "Hale, it's over." The guards raised their weapons, but Keanu's sharp aim took them down before they could fire. Hale stumbled back, his hands raised in mock surrender. "You've got nothing, Reeves," he sneered. "You think a couple of files are going to bring me down? You don't know how this game works." Ryan emerged from the shadows, his voice cold and steady. "I know exactly how it works, and this time, the game ends with you." Hale's smirk faltered as Ryan stepped closer. His gun trained steadily on the man who had torn his world apart. For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the sound of Hale's shallow breaths. "You think this is going to bring you peace?" Hale spat. "Killing me won't change anything." Ryan's finger twitched on the trigger, his anger boiling over. But then, in his mind's eye, he saw Shadow standing between him and Hale, just as the dog had always done in moments of danger. He heard the bark that had saved his life, felt the weight of Shadow's final sacrifice. Keanu's voice cut through the haze. "Ryan, don't let him win." Ryan exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. "You're right. Killing you would be too easy." He nodded toward Keanu, who moved swiftly to restrain Hale, securing him with zip ties before calling in an anonymous tip to the authorities. As the sound of sirens approached, Ryan stepped outside, the cool morning air filling his lungs. For the first time, the weight on his chest felt a little lighter. He turned to Keanu, who stood beside him, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. "You did the right thing," Keanu said quietly. Ryan nodded, his gaze distant as the sun rose higher, casting light on the city below. Shadow would have wanted it this way. The sirens grew louder, signaling the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Hale's empire was about to crumble, and though Shadow was no longer by his side, Ryan knew that every step forward was a step in honor of the partner who had never once let him down. The hum of fluorescent lights flickered unevenly in the precinct's crowded evidence room as Ryan stood before the commanding officer. His badge and service weapon now returned to him. The past week had been a whirlwind of arrests, media storms, and revelations that tore through the department like wildfire. Captain Marcus Hale was in custody, his smug arrogance crumbling under the weight of the evidence Ryan and Keanu had uncovered. Arkay's empire, once thought untouchable, was unraveling piece by piece, but the triumph felt hollow. Shadow's absence was a wound that refused to heal. The loyal dog's sacrifice hung over Ryan like a shadow, bittersweet and ever-present, even as he stood before the officers who had once doubted him, now offering hesitant nods of respect. Ryan couldn't shake the ache in his chest. Chief Marlowe, a grizzled veteran with a sharp gaze, approached him. "Blake," she began, her tone softer than usual. "You've done more for this department in a week than most of us manage in a lifetime. What you uncovered, it saved lives, exposed corruption, and restored faith in the badge. I don't think we'll ever be able to repay you." Ryan's lips tightened into a faint smile, but his voice was measured. "This wasn't just about me. Shadow gave everything for this. I was just the hands that carried his fight across the finish line." Chief Marlowe nodded, her gaze dropping for a moment. "A memorial's being planned, something to honor what Shadow did not just for you, but for all of us." She hesitated before adding, "You're welcome to take some time off. I can't imagine what you've been through." Ryan shook his head. "Time won't fix this. Work will." The chief studied him for a moment, recognizing the quiet determination in his expression, then gave him a pat on the shoulder. "We'll stand with you, Blake, whatever you need." As the room began to clear, Keanu entered, leaning casually against the doorframe. His presence, as always, was grounding, steady, strong, and reliable. "The city's buzzing," he said, his voice low. "News outlets are eating this up. Hale's empire is toast." Ryan turned, his expression unreadable. "And Arkay," Keanu's face darkened, "disappeared." The files rattled him enough to pull out of public life. But he's not gone. Someone like RK doesn't vanish completely. Ryan exhaled slowly, the weight of unfinished business settling in his chest. He'll resurface. And when he does, Keanu stepped closer, his voice firm but calm. You'll be ready. We both will. The two men stood in silence for a moment before Keanu tilted his head toward the door. Come on. There's something you need to see. Ryan followed him out of the precinct, the cool evening air brushing against his face. The city seemed quieter tonight, as though it, too, was recovering from the storm. They drove in silence until Keanu pulled into the parking lot of a small park. At first, Ryan was confused, but then he saw it, a small gathering of officers, families, and community members standing in a semicircle around a freshly installed statue. Ryan's breath hitched as he stepped closer. It was Shadow, immortalized in bronze, standing tall with his ears perked, his expression calm and noble. Beneath the statue was a plaque that read, Shadow, a hero's loyalty never fades. For a moment, Ryan simply stood there, his mind racing with memories. The times Shadow had stood between him and danger, the countless nights they had spent together. Shadow's quiet presence grounding him when the world felt too chaotic to bear. The image of Shadow wagging his tail weakly in his final moments, his amber eyes locking with Ryan's as if to say, I did this for you. Ryan's knees buckled under the weight of it all. He sank to the ground in front of the statue, his head bowed as the tears began to flow. At first, he tried to stifle them, but the grief surged like a flood, too powerful to hold back. His shoulders shook as sob after sob escaped him. Years of pain, guilt, and love spilling out in a torrent. Keanu stood a few steps back, his hands in his pockets, his gaze heavy with understanding. He didn't say a word, knowing there was nothing he could say that would ease what Ryan was feeling. This wasn't just grief. It was the release of everything Ryan had been carrying since the moment Shadow leapt in front of that bullet. I miss him, Keanu. Ryan choked out, his voice barely audible through the tears. I miss him so much it hurts. Keanu crouched down beside him, placing a firm hand on Ryan's shoulder. His own voice was thick with emotion, though he kept it steady. I know you do, and I know he misses you too, but he wouldn't want this. Ryan, he wouldn't want you drowning in this. Ryan looked up at the statue through tear-blurred eyes, his fingers brushing against the cool metal of Shadow's paw. He gave everything for me. How do I even begin to live up to that? Keanu's grip on Ryan's shoulder tightened slightly. By living, Ryan. By carrying his legacy with you, every step of the way. The crowd around them began to disperse, but Ryan stayed on his knees, staring at the statue. Slowly, the flood of tears subsided, leaving him with a hollow ache and a strange, fragile clarity. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered ball, the one Shadow had always loved to chase during their rare moments of downtime. Gently, he placed it at the base of the statue. You deserved better, Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. But you never stopped giving. I'll make sure none of this was in vain. I swear it. Keanu helped him to his feet, and for a moment, the two men stood side by side, staring at the statue as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon. Ryan wiped at his face, his jaw tightening as he straightened his shoulders. As they turned to leave, Ryan glanced back one last time. The sight of the bronze figure etched into his memory. The ache in his chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt lighter somehow, as if Shadow's presence lingered, urging him forward. Keanu's voice broke the silence as they reached the car. You ready? Ryan took a deep breath, nodding. Yeah. Let's finish what we started. The night was silent, save for the hum of the car engine as Ryan and Keanu drove through the outskirts of the city. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of unspoken thoughts. Shadow's memory lingered in every corner of Ryan's mind, but the ache had shifted less sharp, more steady, like a compass pointing him toward what he needed to do next. Keanu glanced at him from the driver's seat, his calm demeanor a steadying presence. Hale's in custody, but RK is still out there, he said, breaking the silence. We've shaken the tree. Now we wait to see who falls. Ryan nodded, staring out at the blur of city lights in the distance. We can't just wait. You know as well as I do that someone like RK doesn't just sit idle. He'll regroup, bury evidence, and rebuild. We need to find him before he finds us. Keanu's lips twitched into a faint smirk. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a folded map. I've been working on this while you were tied up with the precinct. There's a private airstrip about 50 miles from here. RK's name didn't show up in the registry, but one of his associates? Frequent flyer. Ryan leaned over, studying the map. You think RK's planning to run? Not yet, Keanu replied, his voice steady. He's too arrogant for that. But he's moving assets, money, people. He knows the walls are closing in, and he's setting up an escape route just in case. Ryan's jaw tightened. Then we cut him off before he can slip through. The drive to the airstrip was tense but quiet. Ryan's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Shadow's sacrifice, the weight of justice, and the ever-present rage simmering just beneath the surface. But he clung to Keanu's steady presence like an anchor, trusting his friend's instincts and experience to guide them. When they arrived, the airstrip was cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of scattered floodlights. The distant sound of a plane engine echoed across the open field. Keanu killed the engine, and they stepped out of the car, their movements swift and silent. Ryan's grip on his weapon was firm, his senses sharp as he scanned the area. There, Keanu whispered, nodding toward a sleek private jet parked at the far end of the runway. A small group of men stood near the plane, their postures tense, their voices low. Even from a distance, Ryan recognized one of them, RK's right-hand man, Victor Cole. Ryan's heart raced. If Victor's here, RK can't be far. Keanu's hand rested briefly on Ryan's arm, a silent reminder to stay calm. We take this slow. Victor's the key. If we push too hard and he spooks, we lose everything. They moved carefully, using the shadows to their advantage as they edged closer to the group. As they approached, Victor's voice carried through the air. We're on a tight schedule. The boss doesn't want any delays. Get everything loaded now. Ryan's anger flared, but he kept his focus, his grip tightening on his weapon. Keanu motioned for him to circle around, cutting off any potential escape routes. Ryan nodded, moving quickly and silently to position himself on the other side of the plane. Keanu stepped out of the shadows, his presence commanding as he raised his weapon. Victor, drop it. The men spun around, startled, their hands moving to their weapons. Before they could react, Ryan emerged from behind, his gun trained on the group. I wouldn't, he warned, his voice cold. Victor's eyes darted between them, his jaw tightening. Reeves, he spat. I should have known you'd stick your nose in this. Keanu smirked faintly. You know me, always where I'm least wanted. Victor's men hesitated, their gazes flickering to Victor for direction. He raised a hand, signaling them to stand down. You think you've got the upper hand? Victor sneered. RK's smarter than you. You'll never find him. Keanu tilted his head slightly. That's the thing about smart people. They always underestimate everyone else. Before Victor could respond, Ryan stepped forward, his voice low and lethal. Where is he? Victor's smirk faltered, but he held his ground. Even if I knew, you think I'd tell you? Ryan's eyes darkened, the weight of Shadow's sacrifice burning in his chest. You've already lost. The only choice you have left is how this ends for you. Tell us where RK is, and maybe, just maybe, you walk away with something to bargain. Victor hesitated, his gaze flickering between Ryan and Keanu. For a moment, the tension hung thick in the air. Then, finally, he spoke. RK's not here. He's got a safe house upstate, near the old refinery. That's all I know. Ryan's jaw tightened, his grip on his weapon firm. Keanu stepped closer. His gaze locked on Victor. You better hope. For your sake. That's true. Keanu signaled to Ryan, and they quickly restrained Victor and his men, leaving them for the authorities. As they walked back to the car, Ryan's mind was already racing ahead, piecing together their next move. Keanu glanced at him, his expression unreadable. You know this isn't over, right? RK's the kind of man who doesn't go down without a fight. Ryan met his gaze, his eyes fierce. Good. I'm counting on it. They drove off into the night, the glow of the airstrip fading behind them. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Ryan felt the clarity of purpose that only Shadow's memory could bring. Every step forward was for him, and Ryan wouldn't stop until justice was done. The car roared down the uneven road leading to the abandoned factory, where RK was said to be hiding. The headlights cast long, jagged shadows across the crumbling buildings ahead, remnants of an industrial era long gone. Keanu killed the engine a few hundred yards away, and both men stepped out into the cold night air, weapons in hand. They moved with purpose, their steps silent but their minds sharp with determination. This is it, Keanu murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. His sharp eyes scanned the darkened surroundings. But don't think for a second he isn't expecting us. RK doesn't get caught off guard. Ryan nodded, his jaw set tight. Every step felt heavier than the last as Shadow's memory weighed on him. He could almost feel the dog at his side, guiding him forward. Ryan gripped his weapon tighter, whispering under his breath, "This is for you, boy." Keanu motioned for them to split up, taking the side entrance while Ryan approached the main doors. The factory creaked and groaned in the wind, the eerie sound magnified by the silence of the night. Ryan's heartbeat quickened as he moved, his senses sharp and ready. Inside, faint noises echoed, shuffling footsteps, the hum of machinery, and voices too distant to make out. Then, a voice came over a crackling speaker system. "Blake, Reeves, you just don't know when to quit, do you?" RK's voice was calm, laced with mockery. Ryan didn't respond. Instead, he pressed on, his every movement careful and deliberate, following the sound of the voice into a vast, open space. In the center of the room stood RK, flanked by armed guards. Behind him were tables piled with stacks of cash, hard drives, and suitcases, evidence of his operation and his plans for escape. "It's over, RK," Ryan called out, stepping into the room with his gun raised. "Put the gun down and surrender." RK turned to face him, an amused smirk on his lips. He slowly lit a cigar, taking a long drag before speaking. "Blake, you really think you've won something here? You don't even understand the game you're playing." Keanu emerged from the shadows, his weapon trained on the guards. "The game's over. RK, you've run out of moves." For a moment, the room was still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then RK's smirk widened. "If I'm going down, I'm not going alone." The first shot rang out, shattering the silence. Chaos erupted as bullets ricocheted off metal beams and shattered glass. Ryan and Keanu moved in sync, ducking behind cover as RK's men opened fire. Keanu's aim was precise, taking down two guards with quick, efficient shots. Ryan charged forward, his focus locked on RK, who was retreating toward an exit. "You're not getting away this time," Ryan yelled, his voice filled with both anger and resolve. RK darted toward the back door, but Ryan was faster. He tackled RK to the ground, sending them both crashing into a pile of debris. Pinning him down, Ryan's fist connected with RK's jaw, the pent-up rage of weeks pouring out in that single blow. "This is for Shadow," Ryan growled, his breath ragged. RK coughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. But his defiance remained. "You think killing me will fix anything?" he spat. "You're just a pawn, Blake. Always were." Ryan's grip tightened, but before he could strike again, Keanu appeared, his voice steady and commanding. "Ryan, don't let him win." Ryan hesitated, his breathing heavy as the anger burned in his chest. Slowly, he pulled himself back, his hands trembling. "You're right. Killing him would be too easy." He shoved RK against the wall as Keanu secured him with zip ties. Outside, the distant wail of police sirens grew louder. Their mission was complete. But as the adrenaline ebbed, the weight of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost, settled in. The precinct buzzed with activity as officers and reporters swarmed the building, eager to document the takedown of RK and his corrupt empire. Inside the crowded evidence room, Ryan stood quietly, watching as boxes of files, hard drives, and money were cataloged. His work was done. The truth was out. Justice was finally being served. But as the noise around him faded into the background, Ryan felt an emptiness he couldn't shake. Shadow's absence was a constant ache, a reminder of what he had sacrificed to get here. Keanu approached him, his steady presence grounding Ryan as always. "You did it," Keanu said, his voice calm but meaningful. "Shadow would be proud." Ryan nodded faintly, but his eyes remained distant. "It doesn't feel like a victory without him." Keanu placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Let's go. There's something you need to see." The drive to the park was silent, the weight of unspoken words filling the space between them. When they arrived, the golden light of the setting sun bathed the freshly installed statue at the center of the park. Ryan's breath hitched as he stepped closer. It was Shadow, immortalized in bronze, standing tall with his ears perked and his expression noble. Beneath the statue, a plaque read, "Shadow, a hero's loyalty never fades." Ryan's legs gave out as he dropped to his knees before the statue. The dam of grief he had held back finally broke, and tears streamed down his face. He sobbed openly, his cries raw and unrestrained. It wasn't just for Shadow. It was for everything they had endured together. Every moment of courage and loyalty that could never be replaced. "I'm so sorry," Ryan whispered, his voice trembling. "You gave everything for me, and I couldn't save you." Keanu stood silently nearby, giving Ryan the space he needed. His own gaze softened as he watched his friend pour out the grief that had been weighing him down. After a while, Keanu knelt beside him, speaking quietly. "You didn't fail him, Ryan. He gave his life because he believed in you, because you were worth it." Ryan wiped at his face, his hands trembling as he pulled something from his pocket. It was Shadow's old collar, worn and scratched but still intact. He placed it gently at the base of the statue, his fingers brushing over the metal tag. "You deserved better," he whispered. "But I promise you, I'll make sure none of this was in vain." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park, Ryan stood and turned to Keanu. His shoulders were straighter now, his gaze steadier. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Keanu nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "You ready to move forward?" Ryan took a deep breath, his grief still raw but his resolve stronger than ever. "Yeah, let's finish what we started." As they walked away, the bronze statue of Shadow stood tall in the fading light, a lasting tribute to a hero whose loyalty would never be forgotten. What do you think of this incredible story? Did it move you? If you enjoyed it, drop a 2 in the comments below. If you didn't, leave a 7. I'd love to hear your honest thoughts either way. And just a quick reminder, this is a fictional story, crafted to share powerful messages about loyalty, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. It's a reminder that even in our darkest moments, courage and love can guide us forward. If the story resonated with you, don't miss out on more like it. Hit that subscribe button to join the Tapestry of Worlds community, where we bring you more gripping tales that inspire, entertain, and leave you thinking long after the story ends. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see your comments.